approach.
Now see,
Sometimes.
the thing that, and I was going to ask you, we can touch on this in a minute, this idea about cases right in our own backyard, and your wife's the Virginia State Director, and she's talking about cases in Roanoke and Virginia Beach and all this other type of thing, and I'd be very interested in any cases you'd like to mention that were local, but I have a book at home, I think it was Kevin Randall had written it about UFOs over Washington, and the thing that caught my imagination about that wasn't so much the whole idea of the fact that it's our nation's capital and here's these photographs that were on the cover of the Washington Post. It's the idea that I can, I don't live out in the Midwest or somewhere where I've never been to D.C. and D.C.'s this sort of fantasy to me and I see it on TV and everything's a caricature. It's a real city. My father was a police officer there for 20 years. And, the U.S. Capitol, I could drive right down Constitution Avenue and look, there it is. Here's the cover of the book and there's the building. This, this is something that's real. Eventually, it would seem, the odds would favor the idea that it's going to land in your backyard at some point. And when you start talking about cases in Virginia and Maryland and other places that are local, that I think that has a very powerful impact on people. It certainly has on me.
Yeah, I don't think that there should be anybody that thinks that I live in a place where UFO sightings don't occur or something, or this is only something
I think
that
a lot
happens
of people do think that.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I suppose would have to get out. It's that, hey, it doesn't matter where you are, you could have a UFO experience.
Right.
In fact, the statistics sort of bear out the fact that most UFO sightings have occurred in more open, less populated areas.
Right.
Yeah, they do see UFOs over Manhattan once in a while.
Right.
Or over Washington, D.C. Certainly, you can pick up many cases. But if you chart these on a map of the U.S. over the years, there tend to be more in the Southwest, in the West, in the Great Plains.
Right.
And there's some kind of easy reasons for that would have nothing to do with the phenomenon itself so much as it's easier to, you have longer sight lines out there. There's less buildings that are jutting up against the sky.
I would actually,
this open sky.
I would counter just with this. My family is first generation in Virginia. They're all from Westchester County, New York, and the Hudson Valley in the 1980s. I mean, the astonishing number of people and sightings there.
That's sort of an anomaly. There aren't too many cases you can point to where the UFOs have overflown thousands of people at a clip.
Yeah.
There are a few episodes like that.
Right.
But the majority of sightings tend to be small groups of people and not normally in huge cities.
Right.
Again, you can always pick out one of the first
Mexico
cases
City,
Hopkins
Phoenix.
worked on was in New York.
Right.
Yeah,
I was just trying to read a debunking paper about that last night just to see what they had to say.
Yeah, and you could ask Buddy, here right now.
Right.
And but that was the first case he worked on there. And
I wish I'd been
saw
better
something.
prepared to come up here. I would have spent the whole day camped out.
You could easily ask
tapping
Bud
all
and
you
Colonel
guys.
Halt,
Right, yeah, right, right.
You don't get many opportunities to question them.
Absolutely.
But it's very much a vertical phenomenon in the sense that UFOs don't often fly like airplanes fly. Where if you see an airplane going over Washington now and it's headed west, that it's a reasonable hypothesis that conceivably if it's headed toward Nashville, given enough time at the speed of the airplane, you'll see it appear over Nashville when it flies.
Right.
And then beyond that, over another city.
Right.
And then another city until it gets to the west coast. And all along the way, you can see this aircraft.
Right.
UFOs don't fly like that.
Right.
They just fly vertically, and they sort of drop in on someone or a couple people, hover around there for a little while, and depart the same way, straight up. Well, when something goes straight up and down, you limit the amount of people that can see it from outside the area.
Right, right.
And
yeah, look at the O'Hare case. I mean, that's a perfect example.
Exactly, yeah.
Air traffic control didn't even know that somebody
literally
was
goes
there.
up and down, like an elevator.
Right.
How many people are going to see it? Well, just the people who happen to be looking right up there.
Yeah, right, right.
And but that's their modus operandi for whatever reason.
Right.
And they fly quickly.
Right.
It's so fast sometimes that, in the blink of an eye, they're gone.
Well, and again, as you stated a few minutes ago, I mean, the idea of just almost a planned avoidance of discovery, you know, intentional evasiveness built into the whole thing.
It almost seems like they know us better than we know ourselves.
Right.
You know, if you want, they might ask, how do you integrate a society or institute yourself into a society without really being recognized? Well, they've done that. They've managed to pick up.
Certainly seems that way.
You make it so impossible that no one believes you, and then you can sort of appear in full view of people,
Right.
and you're not accepted.
Right.
Wow, you really got to know a psychology of how people think in order to do that.
Right.
But when you think about God, it's kind of scary and creepy.
Isn't it?
They have
I
seemingly
couldn't agree
done
more,
that,
right?
you know.
That's exactly right.
I was reading a while back about, and I might have said this on the radio, but so I apologize for repeating
No,
myself.
not at all.
But I was reading about these crazy so-called army ants they have down in South America and other places that when these things, when something crosses the path of these things, if you're unlucky enough to be caught by the army ants, whether it's a human or whether it's a poor animal or something like that, they devour you like that. Like in minutes you'd just be a skeleton lying there, and 10 minutes before you were a living person,
Right.
or a bird or whatever it might be. But so the point is those things are extremely ravenous, and their eyes are always going, where can we get the next food?
Right.
You know, where's prey? Bop, bop, bop. Well, anyhow, they've discovered a long time ago from looking into the hives of these creatures that there's certain beetles and stuff like that can coexist with the army ants. And in fact, when the army ants are in their hives and underground burrows and everything like that, the egg chambers and all this kind of stuff, these insects can literally climb over the backs of the army ants and the larvae and everything like that, and live a life down there surrounded by these army ants, simply because they move in such a way, I won't say it's necessarily quickly, but that they move in such a way that to the army ants they're just ghosts, and they're never able to focus on these things enough to say, there's invaders in the hive, get the invaders out.
Right.
But these things are sort of have a symbiotic relationship with the army ants.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and some of the most, for their size, ravenous creatures that probably history's ever known.
Right.
And here they can coexist side by side and live.
Right.
And the army ants don't know it. And is that what's happening here with the...
Or they're not
the
concerned
UFOs?
for whatever reason. They're just oblivious to it.
That could be a
You know.
reason. That could be. I
Right.
would think they want that.
Yeah,
because they
right.
don't want things messing with the eggs.
Right.
But
But you know, you made another. I thought you were going to repeat this one. I hadn't heard that before.
I'm trying not to repeat
No,
myself.
not at all.
I only have a limited number of examples.
You had made another point that I had heard about the idea that the ants, looking at us, thinking that if we were actually intelligent, we would contact their queen
Oh
ant.
yeah, well, that's a
You
good,
know.
that's kind of an
I don't-
interesting point too.
Yeah.
We do make the mistake of giving too many human attributes to the
Yeah,
aliens,
definitely.
where they're going to act like humans,
Right.
but they're not humans by
Right.
definition.
Definitely.
So they're going to act.
The last thing I'll touch on, well, actually two things, if I could, real quick. I meant to ask your wife the same question, just out of curiosity. What do you know about Whitley Strieber? Have you paid much attention to him? Is he really just kind of out on the fringe, or is he maybe, you know, still considered? I know he's not necessarily an investigator; he's more of an experiencer.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
But I mean, how much does his work kind of fit in? Do people sort of reach out and touch on him as a touchstone at all, or is he almost kind of quarantined off in his
Yeah,
own
well,
world?
I think he's more toward the quarantined off in his own world kind of a thing at this point. I know he probably has a radio program, or he was doing a radio program for a while.
I still listen to his podcast, and his website supposedly gets something like 16 million hits a month. I mean, he's got a pretty good
popular
business.
on a certain level, and I don't have
He has
anything.
interesting guests.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, exactly. I don't have anything against him as a person. I would think that the UFO researchers who are really serious in the field, like Stan and Bud Hopkins and some of the younger people, there's no interaction with Hopkins, with Strieber and them anymore. There was for a little
I
while
guess
with
that's
Hopkins.
really what I was getting at. Yeah.
There's not. He expressed on several occasions his dislike and distaste for the UFO field and didn't want to have anything to do with the
Strieber did?
Strieber did, the
Really?
crazy UFO researchers, and distanced himself from the field.
Wow, that's very interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't quite know that.
he has come out with that for various reasons. Someone would say something against him, and his nose, he'd get his nose out of joint, and it was like, a pox on all you guys.
Right.
I'm not dealing with you.
He
You're
definitely
lunatics.
has an air about him that he just thinks he knows it all, or you know. I hate to make such a
Yeah.
grand statement, but
Yeah, I would say that's, for whatever reason, that's the way he comes across. And I've only seen him in person once, and that's how he was. He was kind of arrogant and sort of just walked in an imperious manner around. But
well, if you were in a movie, Christopher Walken played
Yeah.
you in a movie,
yeah,
maybe
well,
you
you got
think
a
that of
point
yourself
there.
too.
You got a point there. But I don't know if you would. Maybe I wouldn't. But anyhow, he went through that stage where he was working with Bud, and then they had a falling out or whatever. And I think Whitley went off the deep end. I cannot believe he went back in time to like Roman times and all this stuff like he's recounted in his books. I'm sorry, I just don't
Sure,
buy it.
sure.
But in his defense, there came a time when I had to call him up, and I had a manuscript that he was casting about for manuscripts to publish that had to do with UFOs. Even if it had been published before, if the copyright belonged to the author, he was sort of looking for something that he might be able to publish under his imprint of books. He came out with 1 or 2 books in this series, and I had a book for him like that. So I called him up down in Texas, and on the phone he was the nicest darn guy, and I just had a great conversation with him. He was very, he wasn't arrogant. He was just a nice fellow, and he was willing to give it. He said, "Oh yeah, I'll look into that book." Well, I don't think that never worked out for whatever reason. It wasn't Spieber's fault, I don't think.
Sure.
But so I found him in person, a rather on the telephone, a rather nicer person than I saw him than he was the one time I saw him roaming around a conference.
Right.
And certainly I've heard a lot of negative stuff about him, and he said a lot of negative stuff that makes you wonder why he's got some kind of a little bit of a split personality,
Right.
Jekyll Hyde,
Right.
kind of a thing going on there.
Right.
But in general, he's probably a nice enough guy.
Sure.
You know, when
As I
all
say, he
is
has
said
some
and
pretty
done.
interesting guests, and he reaches a little bit outside of the UFO field into
Yeah.
some areas that I'm kind of interested in.
Well, that's
you know.
fine. I would applaud that.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, I can't say too much really bad about the
No,
guy. He
and
hasn't been too negative on the field, and
Right.
he doesn't. His own personal experience as well. If he believes in, that's good. I don't necessarily think that. He had a lot of good stuff to do with publicizing abductions, and his first book was certainly chilling and was certainly in line with what other people have reported as
Right.
abduction episodes.
Right.
So, in that he seems to have been telling
At least the first
truth.
2/3 of that movie of Communion is fascinating
Yeah,
stuff too.
yeah.
Occasionally when I can stomach it, I try to watch it again. It really scared me kind of the first time I saw it, but I wasn't sure what to expect. But the last thing, and again, the question I didn't get in. You got this conference today, but what do you have on your schedule coming up? What are you guys doing in the next few months here?
Yeah, we go on our vacation. No, this literally is coming. No, UFO-wise,
Good.
there's
Good for you.
Yeah, finally. There isn't anything UFO-wise coming up. Unfortunately, that I know of.
Right.
Sue might plan another conference down at Smith Mountain Lake. She likes to
Yeah,
do
I was going to ask you
conferences.
about that one, right?
Yeah, and I think she's been talking about having something down there in May. And this other fellow that's here today, Cameron Pack, he has plans for a conference down in the Norfolk area, I think. But I'm not really involved in anything in the immediate Washington, Maryland area,
Right.
Virginia area.
Right.
Steve Bassett conference